Good afternoon to the participants of this webinar. We'll just give it another few seconds to allow some more people to join us, and then we'll get going. Do you want to put that onto slideshow, Ellen, if that's possible? Perfect. Thank you very much. I think then it's a minute past. We'll start. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to this afternoon's virtual information seminar on Becker Muscular Dystrophy. I'm Dr. Kate Adcock, and I'm Muscular Dystrophy UK's Director of Research and Innovation. We've got a really great and packed agenda this afternoon with an amazing and fantastic array of speakers. We're going to split the session into two parts, starting with a look at the latest developments around a clinical trial into Becker Muscular Dystrophy, and that will give a chance for you online to ask any questions that you might have on that topic. We'll then move on to a discussion on living with Becker Muscular Dystrophy, where we'll focus on answering your questions, as well as covering as many that we can have been submitted in advance. We'll be using the Q&A function, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. If you hover your mouse around, or your finger on your screen, you should be able to see the Q&A function. If you could please type your question or comment into the box, and we'll then feed it into the discussion. So to help us manage the technical side of the event, we won't be asking people to ask their questions directly. So anything you wish to ask, please do type it into the box, and we will include it into the discussion. But anything that we don't manage to cover this afternoon or don't know the answer to, we'll seek to answer through our website afterwards. And before we begin, I just want to give you a note that our helpline is available to anyone affected by any muscle wasting condition. So please do contact us if you have any questions or if you're in need of support. We can help you with information and can either support you directly or point you to where you can get support from others. The number and email address should be on your screen right now, and you can call us on 0800 652 6352 or email info@musculardystrophyuk.org. And finally, just a reminder that we're recording this session, and it will be available in the next few days through our YouTube channel and through our website. I'm going to be chairing the first part of today's session, and then I will be handing over to my colleague Neeru. But first of all, I'm just delighted to introduce our first guest, who is Professor Ros Quinlivan. Ros trained as a pediatric neuromuscular disease in pediatric neuromuscular disease, and was the first neuromuscular fellow at Guy's Hospital, and she was funded then by Muscular Dystrophy Campaign, as we used to be known. She's currently based at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery in London, where she has developed and is the clinical lead for the Neuromuscular Complex Care Centre at Queen Square. She chairs the London and South East Coast Strategic Neuromuscular Network and is chair of the British Myology Society. And she's also a member of MD UK's Services Development Committee. Ros, I have no idea when you find time to sleep. I'm so delighted she's going to be able to talk to us today about a clinical trial that she's involved in Becker Muscular Dystrophy. So, Ros, I'm going to hand straight over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate, and to everyone at Muscular Dystrophy UK for giving me an opportunity to talk about this really exciting clinical trial that is going to start very soon in the United Kingdom. So I'm just going to put my slides onto slideshow, and I hope you can see those. And as Kate said, I currently work at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery, and this trial is going to take place in 3 centres in the UK, in Newcastle, led by Dr. Michaela Guglieri, and in Manchester, led by Dr. James Lilliker, and we will be running the trial as well at Queen Square. So it's a randomised placebo-controlled trial for people with Becker Muscular Dystrophy, and the trial is called Grand Canyon, so an easy name to remember. Oops, now what's happened? My slides have frozen. Here we go. So just to give you a little bit of background about the product that we're going to be investigating, you will all be aware that to have Becker muscular dystrophy, you have a mutation or a deletion in the DMD gene. And this gene is responsible for making a protein called dystrophin. And in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, this protein dystrophin is completely absent. But in Becker muscular dystrophy, it's what we call a truncated protein. So it's weaker than normal. And this protein binds, this is a very small image here, but it binds a complex of proteins that cross from the inside of the muscle cell fiber across the membrane, the cell membrane of that muscle fiber, and then links and forms bridges with other muscle fibers. And muscle fibers contract and relax. That's how we move. And this skeleton of proteins helps to protect those muscle fibers from being damaged during that process of contraction and relaxation. So when the protein dystrophin is either missing or it's weakened, then the muscle fibers can become damaged and then they degenerate. And we have two types of skeletal muscle fibers. We have fast muscle fibers and we have slow muscle fibers. So when you're, for example, carving a chicken, you'll see there's red meat and white meat. And these different colors of meat represent different proportions of fast versus slow fibers. So white meat is predominantly fast fibers and red meat slow fibers. And this slide shows really what happens to somebody who does not have muscular dystrophy when they do 30 minutes of eccentric exercise. So what do we mean by eccentric exercise? It's a sort of exercise where you're really putting a lot of effort into the muscle, but you're not moving the muscle. So an example would be lifting a very heavy weight above your head and holding it still with your arms. And what you can see in this image here, which I'm going to show with my mouse, is that the slow muscle fibers are fairly intact, but the fast muscle fibers are quite disrupted and prone to damage. And this is in somebody who is otherwise healthy. And it just shows that these fast muscle fibers are more prone to damage than slow muscle fibers. And when a muscle fiber is damaged, it leaks biomarkers, substances into the bloodstream. And the one that you will be very familiar with is the CK or creatine kinase. And we know in muscular dystrophy that is always raised. But there are two other biomarkers that can give an idea of muscle damage, particularly from fast muscle fibers. One of them is fast troponin or TNN12, and the other is myoglobin. And these leak into the bloodstream and they can be measured through blood testing. So they can be markers of muscle damage. And if you look at these markers of muscle damage in the bloodstream of people with muscular dystrophy and compare that with people who don't have muscular dystrophy, you can see that they're raised. So this image here on the left shows creatine kinase levels in healthy individuals. And there's a few that are raised here, probably because of the reason I've just said for exercise. Here are the people with Becker muscular dystrophy, and you can see the levels are higher than healthy individuals. And then in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, the highest levels. And likewise, we can see the same for fast skeletal muscle troponin, which is more often than not normal in healthy individuals, and in a few people it will be raised, but it's raised in Becker dystrophy and raised again in Duchenne dystrophy. And if we compare these two markers of damage for fast muscle fibers with a marker for damage for a slow muscle fiber, and this is skeletal muscle troponin 1, but TNN11, you can see it's roughly the same for normal, healthy people, people with Becker dystrophy, and people with Duchenne. So this suggests that these markers, CK and fast skeletal muscle troponin, might be a good measure to see how much muscle is being damaged on an ongoing basis. And so this trial will use those markers, or has used those markers as well in previous studies as outcome measures. And the idea of this trial, which is being sponsored by the company Edgewise Therapeutics, is to try and prevent those fast muscle fibers from being injured when muscle is working, when it's contracting. And so this product is designed, this medication is designed to protect the muscle from being damaged, and then altogether try and preserve that muscle function. So the first studies that took place, so the drug is called EDG-5506, so it hasn't got a proper name yet. But the first studies were performed on muscle taken from MDX mice. So an MDX mouse is a mouse that carries a mutation in the DMD gene. So it lacks dystrophin. And here you can see a resting muscle in an untreated mouse. So an untreated mouse muscle. And here is an untreated mouse muscle following contraction, and you can see that there are areas of damage. These little circular areas are where the muscle has become damaged from contracting. And when that muscle is treated with EDG-5506, again, it looks exactly the same in the resting state, but after contraction, there appears to be fewer areas of muscle damage. In fact, I can't really see any in this slide. So the ARCH study followed a phase 1 safety study of EDG-5506 in 12 men with Becker muscular dystrophy. And it was an open label. So in other words, there was no placebo, and it was a single center study. It took place in Atlanta, USA. And the purpose of this study was to assess the safety and the pharmacokinetics. That's how the body metabolizes the drug EDG-5506. And the primary objective of this study was to assess the safety of the drug and its tolerability over a 12-month period. And people who were included in this study had either been in the phase 1 very first safety study, or they were men with Becker dystrophy who were able to walk, who had a confirmed mutation, and they had to be able to complete at least a 100-meter time test. And what you can see here, as well as those the outcome measures were for safety, pharmacokinetics, that's a blood test to measure the levels of the drug in the blood, and they did a number of functional outcome measures. So the NSAA is the North Star Ambulatory Assessment, and this is a series of functional tests that you have to do. So, for example, standing on one leg, or standing on your heels and your toes, things like that. And it has a maximum score of 34. There is a very similar scale called the NSAD, which had previously only been assessed in people with limb girdle muscular dystrophy, but it was decided to assess it to see if it would be useful in Becker dystrophy in this study. 100-meter timed walk or run test, and other timed function tests. And following a screening assessment, people were treated with a daily dose of 10 milligrams for 2 months, 15 milligrams for 4 months, and then 20 milligrams for the remaining 6 months. And what you can see here is that 12 months of treatment with EDG 5506, there was a decrease in these biomarkers of skeletal muscle damage. So if you look at the CK measurements here, there was only one patient where it went up, everybody else it decreased. And overall, there was a decrease of 37%, and this was statistically significant. Excuse me. Then if you look at the fast skeletal muscle troponin 1, again, you can see that in all of the participants, it was reduced very dramatically by 76%. And again, this was statistically significant. And in fact, those people who had the highest levels of those biomarkers at the start had the greatest benefit. So it suggested that perhaps there is some reduction or protection of activity-induced muscle damage. Again, if you look at the different dosing regimes, here the light blue represents the 10 milligram dose. The intermediate blue is the 15 milligram dose, and the dark blue, the 20 milligram dose. And what you can see is for all of those doses, the CK is reduced. So it happens very quickly and it seems to be sustained. And likewise for the muscle troponin 1, the same effect was seen, and also for myoglobin. And in fact, there isn't a great deal of difference between the different doses. And when they looked at the functional studies, the NSAA showed stabilization. So there have been 2 published natural history studies for Becker Muscular Dystrophy, and they have shown that the NSAA score falls by about 1.2 points per year. And what you can see here is compared with those natural history controls, there seems to be stabilization of the NSAA score. Now, we have to say there's only 12 participants here, but it's certainly encouraging. And if you look at the individual responses, you can see for some individual, there certainly was improvement, whereas others, they were either stable or they decreased. There was also no decline from baseline on the other key secondary endpoints. So if you look at the 100-meter timed walking test, it stayed relatively stable for all doses over that 12-month period. And likewise, the grip strength, there was really not much change from baseline. So the conclusion from the outcomes of the ARCH study were that firstly, this drug EDG 5560 was very well tolerated at all doses, that there was a rapid and sustained and significant decrease in these multiple biomarkers of disease progression that I've already shown you, the CK, and the troponin 1, and the myoglobin, and that there seemed to be a dose response, and the maximal biomarker response was at the lowest dose, so the lowest dose worked well. There was also stabilization of those functional assessments with a trend towards improvement. So this trial identified key factors for the design of a potentially registrational trial. And the first trial that followed from this was Canyon, which we're currently running at Queen Square. And Canyon started off with 15 milligrams of EDG 5506, but this has now been decreased to 10 milligrams. And this is a randomized placebo-controlled trial where there are 3 people on treatment to 1 person on placebo. But following the results of the EDGE study, there's been now a major amendment to the trial protocol. So the Canyon trial is for a 12-month period, but now we are about to start Grand Canyon. So Canyon is now closed for recruitment. but we are about to start recruiting for the Grand Canyon trial, which is an 18-month trial. And following a screening visit, patients will be randomized to receive 10 milligrams daily of EDG 5506 or placebo. And the chance of getting treatment versus placebo is 2 to 1. In order to be enrolled, you have to fit the inclusion criteria. So this trial is for adults only. You have to be aged including 18 and up to and including 50 years of age at the time of the screening visit. And you have to have a documented dystrophin mutation or deletion and be clinically consistent with a diagnosis of Becker muscular dystrophy. Also, you have to be able to complete that 100-meter time test in less than 200 seconds, but you can use a mobility aid if you need to. So that might include, for example, a walking stick. And you have to be able to perform the North Star Ambulatory Assessment and achieve a score that is 5 or above, but not above 32. Remember, the highest marks are 34, but if we were to recruit people with a score of 34, then there would be no room to show any benefit if it were to occur. So the maximum score in screening has to be 32. There are also exclusion criteria. So we will not be allowed to include people who have evidence of reduced cardiac function that is 40% or below on the ejection fraction. We will not be able to include people whose breathing function is significantly reduced, and that means an FVC, a forced vital capacity, that is less than 60% predicted. We will not be able to include people with moderate or severe kidney or liver impairment, and also people who've received steroids for more than 10 days in the previous 6 months. And that's because the steroids might interfere with this study. But people who are taking inhaled steroids for asthma or intranasal steroids for allergies would still be allowed to join the trial. And also there are a group of other drugs which are called strong cytochrome P450 CYP3A4 inhibitors. I won't go through all of those, but there's quite a long list. And if you're on one of those inhibitors or inducers, these are drugs that induce liver enzymes or block liver enzymes that metabolize drugs, then you would not be able to go into the trial. So we have a list of those drugs which we would cross-check. And the reason for that is that might interfere with the metabolism of the drug we're trying to measure, to assess. Also, if you've been in another trial and receiving an investigational drug within 30 days, or what we call 5 half-lives of that drug's life, then we would not be able to include you. So what are the endpoints? The endpoints are the major outcome measures for this Grand Canyon study. Well, the primary endpoint is the change from baseline after 18 months in the North Star Ambulatory Assessment, and also the incidence, the frequency and severity of adverse events and serious adverse events during treatment with either EDG 5506 or placebo. The secondary endpoints will include the other functional tests, so the NSAD, 100-meter time test, a 10-meter walk or run, a 4-stair climb, and also stride velocity. And we'll be looking at the change from baseline over this 18 months, so the change at month 18. And there will also be a change from baseline to month 18 in the fat fraction of upper leg muscles assessed by MRI. Although not every centre will be doing the MRI, this will be limited to a small number of centres. They will also look at the levels of the drug in the blood. This is called pharmacokinetics, and the safety and tolerability. So looking at treatment emergent side effects. And then there will be some exploratory endpoints. Again, the change from baseline to month 18 in these biomarkers of muscle damage that I've already shown you, the CK and the fast troponin. The pull, which is looking at muscle strength in the upper limbs, and also some patient-reported outcome measures, which will include quality of life measures as well. So that's all I have to say about this study. And I'd like to say a huge thank you to Sam Collins and the team at Edgewise who put these slides together for this presentation. And also my colleagues who are supporting the Canyon clinical trial and will also be supporting the Grand Canyon trial at Queen Square. That's Lakshmi Desikan, Louise Germain, Peter Finnegan, Alex Petrus, and Todd Rawlings. And I will end there and stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Ros. That was fantastic. It's just so exciting to see that there is a clinical trial. One's been happening, but one that's going to be starting soon, and which kind of leads me to my first question, really. How, if somebody would like to be, thinks that they meet those inclusion and exclusion criteria, so that they think they can do the walk in the time that you say, and they haven't got those issues that you're saying, and that complicated liver drug that they shouldn't be taking, or shouldn't be taking to be in the trial, who do they talk to? How do they get involved?
So I think they should talk to their consultant and ask their consultant to write a very brief referral letter. This is what we've done for the Canyon study. And then certainly they can be referred to me or to James Lilliker in Manchester or Michaela Guglieri in Newcastle. Certainly in my centre, what I would do is when I get that referral letter, I can then register the person on our system and arrange a video call with them. And the purpose of that video call is so we can discuss the trial in a little bit more detail. And then if they're still interested, I can email them the patient information, which we would ask them to read very carefully. And then if they want to participate, they can come back and say, yes, I want to participate. And then we would bring them up for a screening study. And the purpose of the screening study then is to be absolutely sure about eligibility. So I like to do that. The video consult gives me a chance to do a bit of pre-screening so that people who are absolutely not eligible, saves them wasting all that effort of coming up and going through all these assessments. But it also gives us a chance to have a chat about the trial and for them to read all the information in advance of coming for any screening assessment.
Classic. And how many visits, sorry, you may have mentioned, I was scribbling down so many things, but how many visits throughout the 18 months, and do they always need to come? Sorry.
Yeah, they don't always need to come. I can't remember off the top of my head. I
Sorry.
don't want to say, I might get it wrong. But there are a number of visits where they have to come face to face, and they probably need to stay overnight. So their expenses would be met for all of that. And then there will be some remote visits as well. So they're kind of interspersed. But I don't want to say exactly the number in case I get it wrong.
Of course. But that's useful to know as well, that there may be some overnight stays as involved. That's great. Thank you. And I mean, after 18 months, it will take longer than to get everyone into the study, do the 18 months and wait to the end. So after this study is finished, assuming that it's safe and there is an effect that can be measured across all of the people that will be in the study, or significantly across the people, could you give an idea about what happens next? What is the likely?
Okay, so yes, so two things. One is just to clarify, the overnight stay is not in hospital, it's in a hotel, just in case anyone's thinking about that. And secondly, it's likely that it's likely there would be what we call an open label extension study. So following the trial, everybody would automatically go into an extension study and receive the EDG 5506. Now, if for any reason the trial shows that the data shows the trial is futile, in other words, the drug doesn't do anything, then obviously that would not happen, because it would not be right to do that. But if the drug, if it looks like the data are promising, then it's very likely there would be an open label extension study, and then everybody who's been in that trial, either on placebo or on treatment, would then go on treatment.
Fantastic. And then the company, one would like to think, if that were the positive, let's be positive, that there is, there is a good signal that there is a effectiveness from the drug, then the company hopefully would then look to work with the regulatory authorities and NICE and Scottish Medicine Consortium, so that it becomes approved by the NHS in the UK. In the UK.
And
but
also
that takes time.
in America as well, and Europe, absolutely. And it's very important. People always worry when they come into trials that they're going to get a placebo, and they say, oh, I'm not getting the treatment. Well, what you have to remember is, if you participate in a trial, this is not a treatment. The purpose of the trial is to understand whether this drug has any benefit, and you cannot assess it properly without having a placebo group. So that's really critical to this. And because the last thing you would want is having a huge placebo effect and people end effective.
Okay.
So the placebo arm of the trial is really vitally important as part of that process, because I know people are always worried about that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. There's a couple of questions that have come in on the chat that relate to this. Could you tell us what were the side effects of EDG 5506 in the study that's now completed?
Absolutely, that's a really good question. So it was very well tolerated. There was one side effect that was reported, not in everybody, but in some people, and that was dizziness and drowsiness. And that effect occurred only for the first few days of taking the drug. And then after that, it disappeared. So the recommendation for that trial was to take the treatment at bedtime. But it looks like this is a very transient effect that doesn't affect everybody. I haven't had anyone report it in our study so far. So I think if it does occur, it's very transient. It goes away with time. For the Canyon study, we've asked people to use sunblock if they're out in hot weather, very sunny weather, just in case. But again, I haven't heard of any reports of any problems with sun. And then the other thing that people need to be aware of for all trials of new treatments, potential treatments, new medications, there's been no study on what happens if your partner gets pregnant while you're on this drug. So what we don't know, not saying that there would anything would happen, it might not, but because it's unknown, anybody who goes into this study will be asked to use contraception for the course of the study and for 6 months afterwards. And that's very important to be aware of. And that's the same ruling for all clinical trials of new medications. It's just because of the unknown.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a good point. I've seen that in lots of other clinical trials, actually, and thank you for pointing that out and explaining why. It's very helpful. Somebody has also asked, can someone sign up for the clinical trial from overseas if they meet the inclusion/exclusion criteria?
Now that, I guess we'd have to discuss that with the sponsors on a case-by-case basis. The trial I should say it's an international study, so the trial is taking place in other centres around the world. So there are some European sites and there are some sites in North America as well. So I think there would have to be exceptional circumstances for people to come to the UK. It would have to be that they can't access one of those sites elsewhere. And that would have to be agreed with the sponsors, because they will be funding the travel costs and so on.
So thank you. And you sort of talked a little bit at the beginning about the way that the muscle damage occurs in people with Becker muscular dystrophy. Is the drug thought to protect that damage in some
Yes.
way? Do we know how it
So
works?
how it works is, as I've explained about what we call eccentric muscle contraction. So when your muscles contract at 100%, there's a high risk of muscle damage. So what the drug does is reduce that degree of contraction down to just below 100%, around about 80%. It doesn't affect the strength of the muscles, but it just protects the muscles from that damage, from that extreme kind of contractile damage that occurs.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting. And so if people are in,
I forgot to say, actually, it's a tablet.
okay,
It's not an injection, it's a tablet. You take it by mouth once a day.
right, and it's not, it's a tolerable tablet. I mean,
Yeah,
okay,
it's not
not sort of like a
mm.
horse pill or
No.
something horrible that someone's got to try and swallow. Oh, that's good to
And
know.
it's not luminous green or anything. It just looks
Right.
like a normal tablet.
And presumably because it's placebo controlled, then the placebo will look exactly the same, so
Exactly the
people
same.
won't know whether they're on.
Nobody knows. We won't know. Nobody involved in conducting the trial will know what people are getting.
Fantastic, fantastic. It's really great to be talking about a clinical trial for Becker muscular dystrophy. This is now kind of a greedy question, Ros. Are there other trials happening or in the pipeline that you're aware of?
Uh, not that well, not that I'm aware of, but I wondered if there might be something along the vamorolone side of things. I've heard a rumor that there might be, but I don't know of any other major international trials at the moment. This is the biggest one for Becker that I am aware of at the moment.
How many people then for this trial, for the Grand Canyon trial, are you looking to try and, I mean, to recruit? Do you have a target number, or are they just
Well,
sort of
it will vary from site to site depending on how on their staffing ratios and so on. So I think there won't be huge numbers at each site, because when we do a clinical trial, this is why it has to be a multi-center trial, because they're quite intensive. So we'll be looking at relatively small numbers at each site, maybe just a handful of people.
And the study is looking at people who are able to walk at the moment, and I understand that obviously is so that you can measure. There's a lot more measures available to see progress or slowing of the condition. But do you envisage that perhaps if this were to become a treatment that was available through the NHS in the fullness of time, that people who have lost the ability to walk already would potentially be able to use this treatment, or is it just too early to say?
I think it's really too early to say that. I think if all of the Duchenne trials, as you know, focused on children who are ambulant, but now there's a recognition amongst all of those many trials in Duchenne that there's a need to start looking at the non-ambulant population, and there are trials starting up in Duchenne in non-ambulant patients. And my guess is that the same will follow with Becker dystrophy, whatever product it is. Initially all the trials will begin with people who are ambulant because it's easier to collect that data. But at this stage, it's quite early and premature to start talking about future trials coming ahead. But that would be what I would think would happen.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And this, again, is probably one of these very sort of vague questions, but this is something that's protecting, as you've explained, is protecting the muscle from over contracting. And I know that this EDG 5506 is being trialed in Duchenne muscular dystrophy.
Wow. Yes.
Do you know whether there are likely to be other trials? Would it work for other forms of muscular dystrophy, or again, is it just too early to say?
I think it's too early to say that at this stage. I think we need to find out whether because the EDGE trial only had 12 participants, so I think we can't really draw too many conclusions yet.
Yeah,
we need to wait for the results of this study, and it's a bit early really to make those conclusions.
Fantastic, thank you. And then just one final thing, I think really that someone has been in touch with I think the London trial site already, and is just sort of waiting for the consent forms and everything, all the paperwork to be finalised, which I appreciate that has to be incredibly precise and signed off by so many different regulatory boards and ethics boards, both from the sponsor, the company, and also locally, to make sure everything that is going to be safe, and that the patients themselves are going to be as safe as possible. So I think that they just sort of waiting for the
That's right.
to drop, and then they're
yeah,
raring to go. So
absolutely. So from a regulatory perspective, we're not allowed to share any information until all of the approvals are in place. So we're getting very close to that point. And as soon as all those approvals are in place, then we can start to share those documents. But unfortunately, they remain confidential until that has happened, because one of the regulators might ask for an amendment, or something to be changed, but you can't share anything till it's all signed off and approved.
Brilliant. But we hope that that will be very soon, and please, we will be able to share that news as well through our channels as well, to let people know. Somebody had just asked whether the trial would include children, and
no, the Grand Canyon study is adults only. There is a Canyon study for adolescents, but we're not going to be involved in that. I don't know, as far as adolescents are concerned, where that trial is going to take place in the UK or not. But again, that's a multi-centered study.
And I should say to the people who are watching the video, watching the webinar, that Muscular Dystrophy UK is also in contact with the company Edgewise Therapeutics. So when there are things to announce, should there be, as you say, the adolescent trial, if that does come to the UK, we will certainly be able to share when we can information about that. So watch this space. We keep our fingers crossed for the community, because it's really exciting to have.
It's very exciting for Becker Muscular Dystrophy. It's a very exciting study.
Absolutely. There's one other question that I think I can just ask, and then I will hand over to Neeru and everybody else. Sorry, Ros, I'm hogging your time. It's not really related to the clinical trial per se, but it is linked. And how often should a CK measurement be done to see the progress of the condition? I think that's probably more in general, not just in relation to a clinical
in
trial.
general, we don't. I mean, CK is used really as part of the diagnosis, isn't it? It's one of the things that brings you to, it's one of the first tests that you have. But actually, it's not something that we use to measure the progress of the condition. It doesn't really tell us anything about that. What we measure is functional ability and muscle strength. And that's why, we need functional measures to determine whether anything is going to be effective or not just these measures of biomarkers. Absolutely. Those measures of biomarkers were really proof of principle measures. So they're proof of principle, which you've always got to have before you can progress on to the next stage when it comes to translational research.
Fantastic. Well, Ros, thank you so much, and thank you to Michaela and to James for being trial sites for the UK. This is really exciting, and we're keeping our fingers and toes and everything crossed that it works well for you and for the community. And with that, I think I will hand over now to Neeru, who will introduce the other speakers in the panel. But thank you so much, Ros. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you, Kate and Ross. And yeah, no, really, really exciting news for Becker Muscular Dystrophy. So if we now begin the Living Well session, I'm Neeru Nayak, so I'm Deputy Director of Care Campaigns and Support, and I'm really delighted to welcome 4 new speakers who will be joining Professor Ross Quinlivan and will help us with the discussion and to answer some of your questions. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Dave Gale. So Dave Gale's 39 and he works full-time as a civil servant from Templand in Dumfries and Galloway and lives with Becker Muscular Dystrophy. He was diagnosed at the old Newcastle City General in 1988 when he was 5 years old. He's been involved with Muscular Dystrophy UK most of his life. Dave was at the launch of the Trailblazers, so the young campaigners that we used to run for Muscular Dystrophy UK, and has been involved for most of its first 10 years. He has been a successful campaigner also, in past winning awards in his home county also of Cumbria. He's now on the Muscular Dystrophy UK Scottish Council and has been for a few years now. The second panelist I'd like to introduce is Dr. John Bourke. John is a consultant cardiologist at the Department of Cardiology, Freeman Hospital, Newcastle upon Tyne. Over the years, John has developed a highly successful dedicated cardiology muscle clinic at the Freeman's Hospital, providing surveillance and treatment for patients with cardiac involvement relating to their inherited neuromuscular disorder. He's also served as a panel member on the International DMD Care Considerations Guidelines Formulation Project convened by the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Atlanta, USA, and contributed to the European and UK guidelines 2009 and 2020, as well as authored the cardiac sections of the forthcoming adult Duchenne standards of care. The third panelist I'm delighted to introduce is Pamela Appleton. So Pam works as a care advisor for people living with neuromuscular conditions in Surrey. She's an occupational therapist by background with a special interest in fatigue management. And she's passionate about partnering with people to help them experience life in all its fullness, despite the many challenges that life does bring. And then finally, I'm delighted to introduce Marina DeMarco. So Marina is a consultant neuromuscular physiotherapist based in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Glasgow, Scotland. She's worked in the field of neuromuscular disorders for over 30 years and works with both children and adults with muscle wasting conditions. Marina has a clinical research and teaching remit and leads the neuromuscular physiotherapy service in Glasgow and the west of Scotland. From 2013 to 2020, Marina was the lead clinician for the Scottish Muscle Network, supporting research and education throughout Scotland, supporting the network to become the first network of excellence in the UK. She is a master physiotherapist for ATOM International, teaching outcome measures and standards of care internationally for global clinical trials. What I'm going to do now is I am going to invite each panelist just to say a few words about their links to Becker Muscular Dystrophy and just to raise some key points about living with and managing the condition. And then once they've had an opportunity to do that, we'll go into the Q&A. And just to reiterate, the Q&A is open. So if you do have any questions, do submit them within the Q&A and we'll see how many we can answer throughout the session. So Dave, can I come to you first?
Yeah, you can do. Well, following that introduction, obviously my name's David Gale and I was diagnosed with Becker Muscular Dystrophy at the age of 5 in Newcastle. Originally, because I'm based in Carlisle, the Cumberland Infirmary thought I had tendonitis and we wanted to do surgery on my tendons. But fortunately, I had a doctor, had a second opinion and sent me to see Professor Kate Bushby over in Newcastle back in the day. So yeah, about Christmas 1988, I was diagnosed following a muscle biopsy. And basically from then, I knew I had Becker Muscular Dystrophy and I've lived with it ever since, all the way through my childhood to adulthood. And yeah, a lot of trials and tribulations along the way with it. When I was younger, I tended to get a lot of cramp. I was encouraged to be active though, but I got cramp and severe pain and things like that. Got to secondary school and things were a lot harder, as you'd expect. The school were even trying to get me to not go to mainstream school because of it. My mum the single mum had to argue the case and everything with them. The school weren't very helpful. They did things like put my form on the 3rd floor and stuff like that. So I was going for a registration up on the 3rd floor, things like that. With fellow people at school, I seem to get on quite well with most. I seem to be friendly with the right people, so I never really had as much grief as maybe some people might get. But probably going into adulthood was when it started getting harder, people going off to university, things like that. And I was left behind a bit, and psychologically I was struggling with that. So I got involved with the charity since then. And it helped me get through the situation, meeting familiar people with similar issues like myself. And although the condition's starting to deteriorate, I'm still pretty positive. I'm still maintaining my job and everything. I've got my wife, my son, my family, friends and colleagues and such like are all good with me. So yeah, just try and make do with what I can do basically. And I've also had I've got cardiomyopathy, which I think Dr. Bork actually helped diagnose me with. So, but thankfully the medications kind of kept that quite unnoticeable. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you for giving us such an honest account of your experience of living with Becker muscular dystrophy, and I'm sure the audience will appreciate that as well. And I probably will have some specific questions for you a bit later on things you've already touched on. So thank you, Dave.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Just to move on to you, John, and just a quick comment from myself from a helpline perspective, because we still, surprisingly, get quite a few people coming through to the helpline that don't have Becker muscular dystrophy, but aren't seen by a neuromuscular centre and do not have cardiac checks. And it was a conversation I had with Kate earlier on in the week where we were both quite surprised by that. And we do signpost people across to services, but sometimes people do still get lost in the system. So I just wanted to bring that up before you had an opportunity to say a few words. Thanks, John.
Yeah, that's exactly one of the key differences, say, between Duchenne and Becker. And I guess in cardiology, perhaps just as in muscle terms, we focused for many, many years on Duchenne because of its severity, and to a certain extent because less people are affected, but also because they're more variable in their course. Becker has tended to be neglected until recently, so it's fantastic to see that Ross is describing a trial, perhaps one of the first trials focusing on the Becker condition. But Ross has also explained how muscle damage occurs in skeletal muscle, but exactly the same thing happens within the heart. Heart is a muscle as well. And as Dave has said, symptoms have nothing to do with this. If you were looking for symptoms to guide you as to whether your heart was going to become affected or not, you wouldn't get symptoms until the heart was already at rock bottom in terms of damage. And then you'd have missed the boat in a large way in terms of what could be done to strengthen and protect the heart. So we also struggle because although there is some natural history data now emerging, we didn't really know either what proportion of people or when exactly treatments should start in Becker, and that was different also from Duchenne. But as best we understand it at the moment, about 50%, so half of patients with Becker dystrophy will develop cardiomyopathy. Now that's obviously great in terms of comparison with Duchenne, but one of the big differences is because half the people won't get cardiomyopathy to any extent, we don't routinely go for preventative treatments. And that's again a big difference. So no symptoms and variable course as to whether the heart is affected or not, and of course those changes in the heart occurring at a later stage, all combine to make it essential to have heart tests to identify whether you're developing problems or not. So rather than commit everyone to treatment with half the people getting no benefit and all perhaps side effects from the treatment, we have to wait for some indication that the heart in a particular individual is becoming affected. And that's traditionally done by screening of the heart with imaging, echo scans, MRI scans, ECGs, that kind of thing. And traditionally, you look for evidence, early evidence of heart weakness on an ultrasound that's an echo scan. But increasingly, we're aware that there are phases when you can detect heart involvement before the heart actually begins to weaken if you use more sensitive scans like MRI scans. And similarly to what's being done in muscle conditions, MRI scanning is essentially able to allow us to look ahead in a way that echocardiography doesn't. So if we have the availability and somebody has an MRI scan and is suitable to have that kind of scan, that's probably the preferred way of screening now in Becker dystrophy, because you can then pick up the heart is normal on echo, but we're seeing changes on the more detailed scan, the MRI scan, and that would justify starting treatment. So and treatments, we don't need to go into the details. The treatments are very similar to what's prescribed routinely for Duchenne dystrophy at the moment, and they will support the heart and keep it strong. And I guess the last thing to say is that because the muscle effects and breathing effects are much less for Becker and occur much later, then you would say that the heart plays a bigger part in preventing people living to a normal life expectancy. So it's very important the heart gets assessed, looked at, treated in a timely way, and then keeps as strong as possible for as long as possible.
Thank you, John. Dave, I'll come to you in just a second. Quick question for me. So is it appropriate, John, then, for us to advise people to anyone with Becker muscular dystrophy to have an annual heart check, whether it's an MRI or an echocardiogram?
Yes, it's important to have a schedule of tests. The exact interval depends on what your previous or your first test show. If, for example, you're having a heart test and you haven't had one up to now, and let's say you're adolescent or adult already, and your heart check looks good, then at least that gives you a baseline from which to start. And then the interval, the most appropriate interval after that, depends on what's found. So typically it's recommended to be annually, although we're not fixated on annual. If everything is going well and you don't have any evidence, then perhaps that could be lengthened out a bit more over time.
Okay, thank you, John. Dave, do you want to come in?
I was just going to say, when I was getting diagnosed with cardiomyopathy, it was kind of found by accident. I went for screening for a medical trial, and I think I was about 18 or something. And that was where they identified at the RVI in Newcastle that there was something not quite right, and then I was referred to the Freeman Hospital. So I just thought I'd mention that because we've been talking about testing and screening and stuff.
Yeah. No, so really, really helpful, Dave. Thank you for giving us that information. I'm going to now move. We have got a few questions about cardiac checks, etc. I'll come to in a moment. But can I just move on to Pam to just say a few words as well?
Hi, everyone. So yes, my name is Pam Appleton. I work as a neuromuscular care advisor down sort of south of London in Surrey. And I'm just going to apologise. I've got a bit of a cold today, so apologies if I cough and sputter a little bit, but hopefully got my water and my tissues ready as needed. But yes, so I work with a range of people living with all sorts of different types of muscle conditions, so Becker's being one of them. And I think Neru mentioned in the intro, but one of the areas that I'm quite interested in or passionate about is around fatigue management. And I think it was last year, we worked together with MD UK and a few others to produce a booklet around fatigue management, which I just found next to my desk here. And I thought I would share a few insights as to things that I ended up talking to people with Becker's muscular dystrophy about. And I think one of the first things to say is often people will say to me, goodness, I get so tired compared to other people. And often that sense comes with people being worried that they're being perceived as lazy or not pulling their weight or feeling concerned as to why do they get tired more quickly. And I think one of the first things is to recognize that that's part of your condition, in the same way that maybe the problem with your heart is related to your Becker, so is struggling with your energy levels and fatigue. And unfortunately, there's no sort of silver bullet medication that you can take that will suddenly increase your energy levels. Really, fatigue is the sort of thing that requires a holistic view of sort of your lifestyle, really. And what we've aimed to do with sort of this booklet, but also just thinking more generally, is to think about all the different factors that might impact on fatigue. So yes, sleep would be one of them. So making sure you get a good quality of sleep is something that's quite important, but also thinking about things like diet, how much you're doing during the day, kind of how stressed you're feeling, and what your emotional state is like. All these other things also impact our energy, as well as obviously our heart, and a few other factors as well. But thinking about your fatigue is important to kind of address these things in all together. You can start with one thing at a time, but really thinking about everything together is important. And one of the things that I think is very important for Beckers, particularly for people who are maybe a bit more physically active or ambulant, is that, you know, you tend to just keep trying to go, just pushing yourself just to go. I remember chatting to one gentleman to say, well, he almost feels that he needs to work that much harder than everybody else at work, or in education, or just generally socially as well, because he almost feels a sense of needing to prove himself. And what I tend to find is people with Becker's often then have this sort of crash and burn effect. So they might have a day where they feel active and able and ready to go, and so they do a whole lot of things all in one go without really resting, and then they really feel it by the end of the day or the next day, and then it takes them maybe a day or two to recover. So one of the key principles really of managing your energy levels is to try and break things up into smaller chunks. So trying to maybe do something, have a rest, do a bit more, have a rest. So I'll take the example of maybe doing some gardening, rather than spending 3 hours on a Saturday morning just gardening all in one row. Maybe thinking about doing 20 or 30 minutes or whatever your capability is, and then stopping, having a cup of tea, going inside, maybe doing something else, maybe something a bit more admin based. Maybe you need to send some emails or work on some paperwork, and then go back to the gardening, so that you're balancing your activities out. So rather than just doing the big push of trying to get everything done and then I'll have a rest, rather to break things up into a rest. And I think with that as well, often things like prioritizing what is important to do, delegating to other people, things that maybe you don't need to do but that someone else can do, are also important things to think about. But the key thing with prioritizing as well is to make sure that you don't just prioritize all the jobs, to make sure you prioritize the things that are important to you, that you enjoy, that restore you. You might talk about it being a self-care. And a tip for trying to do that more effectively is to actually put it in your calendar, so into your diary or your calendar, or however you like to manage it, rather than just putting in all your appointments and social activities and work-related tasks. Make sure you schedule in every week sort of moments of self-care. So whether that's within your day, thinking I'm going to take a 5-minute break in the middle of my morning because I need to go and do something else and have a rest, or whether it's actually having a 2-hour chunk where, I don't know, whether you like to have a bath, or to do a puzzle, or go for a walk, or go outside. I think that's just a really important part of managing your fatigue, is to make sure that you schedule in that self-care as well, because otherwise we just prioritize all the things we have to do, and that's no fun for anyone. So that was just a little brief thought around fatigue for me, but I would suggest MD UK do have an electronic copy of this, but you can also order them, I think, Neri, is that right, as a print copy? And it's got different sections about fatigue management. So yeah, do have a look at that if that's something that's difficult for you.
You can actually download that from our website, or we can send it out as a hard copy, like you said. We can also send out a PDF, whichever's useful. So do contact the info inbox or the helpline after this to request a copy. And Pam, thank you. That's really, really helpful. Some really helpful tips. And sometimes things that people don't think about, because they're always trying to, like you say, prioritize the work related and the other things, and sort of neglecting that. So no, really, really helpful tips. Thank you, Pam. Marina, can we finally come across to you for a few words?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Neeru. Lovely to be here. So I've been working with all sorts of neuromuscular disorders for such a long time, and we, run clinics. I do home visits. So I see people in lots of different settings at work, as well as in the clinic. And I think the main things that I come across, like Pam, fatigue management is a huge area. People will say to me, you know, the muscle weakness happens, you know, slowly, and I can deal with that, but sometimes fatigue is very difficult to actually manage. So that is a big area. Looking at things like postural management is huge as well. So I do a lot of that, and not just in the wheelchair, but just looking even at workstations, at where people are, and looking at their posture throughout the day, the different positions they get into, both static posture, which is when you're sitting, lying or standing, as well as that dynamic posture, the way that you're walking. Pain management. Lots of people with Becker Muscular Dystrophy will talk about back pain because of that curve at the bottom of their back and what we can do. So lots of work around stretches. Exercise is a huge area that we talk a lot about. And there is no one kind of size fits all. People with Becker Muscular Dystrophy are on this very, very broad spectrum of ability. People seem to have different abilities at different times in their lives. Some people are walking for long periods, and some people are wheelchair users very early on. So looking at what fits with your lifestyle, where you are, and it really does need to be quite a bespoke, I would say, physical assessment when we're looking at physical activity. But the three kind of areas that we look at that in tends to be frequency, duration, and intensity. And the two areas that we tend to focus on would be the frequency, how often do you exercise, and duration, what are those bursts of activity interspersed with your fatigue management like for you as an individual. So looking at postural management, pain management, and of course exercise and stretches are the three main areas that I would be working in.
Thanks, Marina. That's really insightful and helpful. I think what we can do now is move on to some questions. We have quite a few questions, as we've had some in advance, and I can see quite a few in the Q&A at the moment. So if we just begin with a pre-question that we had that was focused on physiotherapy. So I think one for you, Marina. Pam, you may be able to add to this one as well. It's quite specific, so I don't know how much information you can provide, but let's have a look at it and go from there. So the question was, is a specific physiotherapy program required for an asomatic DMD patient? So this person's son will be 7 years old in December, and he's quite active with no issues or complaints. And then what the person has said is that they've had some mixed reviews from doctors on whether he should be under any specific physio mobility program, or are there certain stretches on a daily basis that they should be doing so they can remain as active as possible? So one for you, Marina.
Okay. So if he's asymptomatic and not showing any tightness in any of his joints, then we don't tend to stretch joints that aren't tight. If you have full range of movement, you're not going to gain much more movement because you've already got full range. However, people might think it's full range, but until you're actually assessed by a physiotherapist, they might say, okay, so you can get your ankle up beyond that kind of 90 degrees, that neutral, you can get beyond that. There still might be a few degrees missing at the end, so we're already starting to see some tightness. So we tend to focus, and we know that the ankles get tight quickly. We also know that the fingers can get, and wrists can get tight quickly too. So we would look at these areas alongside hips. We actually go through all the joints, but they tend to be the first lot of stretches that we'd introduce. So any kind of stretching tends to be our first focus, just to maintain muscle length. And if when it comes to exercises, we look at the activity levels of the child, and play and being as active as possible through play, through swimming, doing the same things as everybody else is really, really important. So we don't tend to say to children, for example, we want you to do 10 of these, or, 20 of these. We wouldn't do that. We look at what the child is doing, and we can maybe advise on activity levels. But within that, again, we're back to this: does a child get sore after any activity? Do they have any forms of fatigue? What are their we're always kind of looking just to make sure that they truly are asymptomatic. So it's not it's encouraging the child in play and in exercise and being as active as possible, checking joints regularly. You get your feet measured every 3 months. So that's how quickly children grow. And it's as they are growing is when we start to see this tightness. So we would recommend that you get regular checks on your joints as well to make sure that we're not seeing any tightness developing. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, I think it does. Thank you, Marina. And I think it also just reiterates that it's important to get assessed. So what you think may not be what a physiotherapist would do through an assessment. So no, really, really helpful. Thank you. So we have one more question relating to physiotherapy. This one's quite specific, and I know you talked about hand movement and grip, etc. So someone has questioned, trying to grip with my left hand is becoming very painful around my knuckles unless I constantly make a fist. I get it with my right hand, but not as bad. This person is right-handed. He's been to see his GP, and his GP has said it was classification. Not sure what that means, but Marina, you may do, but has not told me about any treatment. So is there anything you'd suggest that they could do for tight grip, etc.?
So I'm interested in the fact that he says that, when he starts to grip, regularly, and I'm wondering if there's a stiffness involved in that, and if it's to do with looking at, again, the range of movement, looking at any kind of stiffness within the joint. I also wonder if I don't know the age of this person. I'm interested in the fact that it's left hand, he's right-handed, so he's tending to use his right hand more often. Maybe left hand is not being used quite as often. So with muscle weakness, we do tend to see a bit more stiffness. But also with age, we start to see some people can develop kind of, osteoarthritis in the joints as well. So is there anything like that going on? Do we see swelling at any specific time? Osteoarthritis is also associated with this kind of stiff feeling, but then as you move, it starts to kind of loosen off a little bit. So there's a lot of kind of questions there. That would really need to be looked at, and I think an assessment by someone who is there are lots of physios out there who are very good looking at hands in particular, and I think it would be useful to have a more bespoke assessment just to see what's going on, and to have a really good stretching and movement program perhaps for that hand.
Okay, thanks, Marina. That's really, really helpful. And yeah, the assessment, we go back to that again, don't we? You need a full assessment just to assess needs, etc. And we do get calls like that to the helpline all the time, and we do just try and get people referred back into their neuromuscular centres, because we've also seen that sometimes local physiotherapists may not have seen the condition as much, so it just then becomes a bit more difficult and people get frustrated. But thank you, Marina, really, really helpful. So just sticking to the practical side of things at the moment, we did have a question in the chat, possibly for Pam from your OT background, but if we can't fully answer the question, we can always go back to them afterwards. So Gary has said he's a full-time power chair user with Becker and transfer by shuffling across from chair to chair. He uses an Invacare Flowtech cushion with a wipeable cover and is finding it difficult to slide across. So his question is there a more suitable cushion available which can allow him to slide across more easily? So if you can answer it, that would be really helpful.
Thanks. So I think I know what kind of cushion you're talking about, but I'm not an expert in wheelchair cushions, I will say that. But I think in terms of kind of transferring, and often people will find like the wipeable covers, they tend to create some friction and makes it more difficult to move from side to side. I think I would go back to your wheelchair team who issued your chair to ask them, because there are lots of different types of cushions. So sometimes when people are transferring, but I will just caution you, you can use a slide sheet. So a slide sheet is a really slippery piece of material, sometimes it's doubled over, that you can put underneath your bottom, underneath your legs, to help you to make that less friction. Less friction. But if you're transferring by yourself, you do just need to be careful. And I would suggest maybe having a physiotherapist or an occupational therapist assess it with you. So I wouldn't want to say, oh yes, just use a slide sheet, and then you might slip out of your chair. That would not be a good outcome. But a slide sheet can be really, really helpful with transfers. And you can even get these slide sheets, particularly if you have someone who's helping you. They're like slide sheet gloves that a carer or a family member or whoever's helping you can basically put on and over there. It's like a glove over your arm, and it goes all the way down to your elbow. And that can go really easy underneath your legs, around your bottom, to maybe make your clothing a bit straighter, or to move things around. Also can be used in bed, and those are really, really helpful. A small kind of slide sheet that can be useful just for repositioning bits and pieces. So I'd mention that as well. But yeah, a slide sheet could be a good option to reduce the friction, but I would suggest chatting to your wheelchair therapist to ask for specific advice around a cushion, because there's all sorts around different pressure relieving techniques, different postural needs, and obviously wipeable covers can be really helpful too. But yes, I think we'll say go back to whoever issued you the chair and the cushion, but a slide sheet could be a useful option.
Thanks, Pam. That has answered that quite well. If you do have any further questions, if you can just email the info inbox, we'll see if we can direct you across to somebody that may be able to support. Marina, do you have anything to add to that, or are you happy for me to move on?
I've just taken a note of those gloves because I hadn't seen that before, Pamela, so that's really interesting. What I would say is it's the same situation that we see sometimes with people sitting on beds and then trying to stand up and trying to move like off a cushion. The Flowtech cushions are more air filled, so they don't have that kind of purchase, if you like, to be able to push up and get across. And also sometimes if they're very contoured as well, you're trying to get over the contour. So I totally agree with what Pamela has said. I think you need to go back to wheelchair services and try out the cushion, and try a transfer actually when you're trying out different cushions and things. Because when I was listening to that question, what came into my head was a J cushion, which gives you the kind of stability at the base, but it's also got the gel to help with any kind of pressure redistribution. And they can be quite good, but some of them are contoured, and it's difficult to go over the bit in the middle. If your legs are coming in together, you want something in the middle to keep your legs straight, and it can be difficult to go over that. So you really do need to have that assessment and the ability to try it out as well when you're there.
Thanks, Marina. We've just had a comment in the chat about a slide board which somebody has purchased, and they're quite positive about it. So I thought it would be helpful to mention that. So somebody's just said, we found a brilliant slide board, sorry, which we purchased at Nadex. And it's a slide board with a fixed seat on the board that moves across rather than sliding on the board or with glide sheets. And they believe it gives them more control than slide sheets would, as they found them quite slippery and quite dangerous. It's called a Buckingham glide board. And for them, they've said it's revolutionary. So if it's working for one person, it might be something to trial yourselves and see if it is helpful as well. So thank you for that comment in the chat. We've got lots and lots of questions still to get through. So I am going to, Dave's off screen at the moment, so I might, there, Dave's back. I do have a question for you, Dave, that came in quite early on after you'd said a few words. Happy for you to do this offline or answer online, entirely up to you. So someone has just asked, they wondered if you were still ambulant and if you use a wheelchair, and at what age did that happen? And I think the bit to bear in mind here is everyone's condition is different at different stages, but if you're happy to answer that.
No, that's fine. It's only the past year I've got a manual wheelchair that I keep in the car, and it's kind of more for if my son was going to the park or something like that, you know, places where the ground isn't even, things like that. And also for longer distances, or if I felt tired on a particular day, because before that, I might have just sat and waited in the car, you know what I mean? And you don't feel as involved when you're doing things like that. So I've got it there currently kind of as, well, backup. And sometimes I use a crutch as well. But a lot of places say like a shopping centre or Tesco's or something like that. Can walk around without anything. Or if I'm at home, or it just varies day to day on how I feel. And as we've discussed, not everybody's in the same situation. So yeah, that's me at the moment. I can use a manual one because my upper body strength's still reasonably strong. Some people might not be in that position, but yeah, it's just the past year I've been using one.
Thank you for sharing that and being so honest about it, David. I think it's really helpful for people that are questioning the unknown at the moment. We do have a lot more questions. We've got quite a few relating to cardiac issues, which I'll come to in a moment. But we did have a question. I'm not sure if this is one for Ross or Marina possibly, but anyone who'd like to add into this. So this was an anonymous question. They have a 4-year-old and one of his calf muscles feels almost disconnected and is different from the other side. They're questioning, is that normal for DMD or Becker muscular dystrophy patients to experience this? Or is it too specific a question to answer? And then we can go back to them. So just open to anyone who'd like to comment.
I think it's too specific a question to answer on a virtual meeting like this. What I'd recommend is that when they next go to the clinic, they ask the team to have a look and see what's going on there. Because I think I'm sorry, it's just really difficult to answer that question.
That's absolutely fine, Ross, and I had assumed it would be, but the advice to go and ask those questions to the professional team is probably just as useful, I think. So let me move on. I've got a question here from somebody whose son was diagnosed at 11 years old, and they say, touch wood, he has bouts of cramps and pains, but not more than that, and he's in mainstream school. Their question is quite an open-ended question. What can we do to prepare for the future? Because they're struggling to deal with the unknowns and quite worried that their son will Google things about the illness, and they feel quite sensitive around that. And they are gradually telling him and giving him information. So a really difficult situation that lots of parents come across with children. But the bit they did question was that they're waiting for a local physiotherapy assessment since March. They're questioning, is this normal? It is taking quite a long time. And they've questioned swimming. So I don't know whether hydrotherapy might be something that would be helpful for them. So just open to anyone who would like to offer any comments on that. And then just from our perspective, it sounds like they do need some sort of counselling and psychological support. So we're running a counselling project at the moment, and one of the groups that we will be running in the new year, so in Q4, is for parents that would like to be involved in group counselling. So that might be something that we would suggest would be useful for them as well. But any comments in terms of physiotherapy, swimming, hydrotherapy?
So anything that involves, if there's cramps and if there's pain and things like that, we would start to look at stretching. And waiting from March until now for a physiotherapy appointment, it depends on the area. It's really difficult, and I can't comment on different areas in the UK. Certainly, I do know that there are some areas where there is you know, quite a waiting list because maybe they don't have very many neuromuscular physiotherapists available. So it really, but I would actually go back to your, you know, the neurologist and say, look, you're still waiting. Is there anybody even at the hospital? Because since March, you know, there might be some more tightness developing or something like that. So you really want to kind of get in there and have a look at what's happening. So I would, you know, go back and say, you're still waiting. Is there anybody even at the hospital that could see him for a one-off appointment until he gets community physiotherapy involved, something along those lines. Swimming is something that we do advocate. The whole issue with hydrotherapy, and in Scotland it's very, very difficult to have hydro for long-term conditions. So it tends to be you can get hydrotherapy for short bursts to look at a specific problem. So if, for example, it's after a fracture or something like that, then that's that's a problem that you can then get the therapy for until you've started to improve. But in long-term conditions, it's far more difficult to get hydrotherapy. But there are other areas where the pools are heated to a better temperature. Sometimes in schools, you might find a pool that's open in the evening. So it's really a case of looking to see what is available in your area, speaking to the council in your area, what is available with regard to that. But swimming, definitely, get into the water. That's a good thing to do, because your body is being supported, and it's very good again, for your cramps and for being able to move around in this kind of supported environment. But I would definitely get back in touch with the hospital and see if it's possible to have, we're back to this again, another assessment, because giving very specific advice when you haven't seen someone, it's not possible to do that. So I hope that's helped in some way.
Thank you, Marina. I'm sure it has. So I'm going to move on now. I have lots of questions to do with cardiology. So if we could just run through a few of those now, that would be useful if I can get my words out. So very specific for you, John. What is the threshold for ventricle wall thickness and starting medication? So this is up to 9.9 millimeters, age 12, and not on meds yet.
So that's not a particular measurement that's very helpful in Duchenne, because when you measure wall thickness of the heart, that's mostly something that you're watching for in relation to other kinds of heart muscle problems where the heart thickens up abnormally. Whereas in Duchenne and in Becker, you're looking at a kind of a flabbiness of the heart or an impairment of the beating power. So 9.9 millimeters is within the normal range, but it's not a measurement that I would follow or find terribly useful in deciding about treatment in the particular condition we're talking about, Becker dystrophy.
Okay, thank you, John. And then moving on, so this was, I think, following the conversation about MRI scans. So this lady says her son has regular checkups, 2 yearly, as he has Becker muscular dystrophy. He has an echo and an ECG. Her question is, should he have these annually, and should he ask for an MRI, because it sounds like they haven't had an MRI, just the echo and the ECG.
Yes, it's a difficult one. The main reason that I focused on MRIs is that it allows you to say whether the heart is becoming involved at a stage before heart muscle weakness, even early heart muscle weakness, becomes apparent on an echo. So increasingly in Becker dystrophy, and also in the females who are affected by the DMD gene abnormalities, we rely on very sensitive tests to try and identify those who are going to become affected, as opposed to those who probably won't. So it depends a little bit on age. Remember, in Becker dystrophy, heart involvement leading to weakness of the heart tends not to emerge until early adulthood or even later. So I'm not sure of the age of the questioner's child. So if you're dealing with a child, then probably an MRI isn't relevant. If you're looking at an adolescent or older, then having a baseline MRI probably would add new information and allow you to look further ahead. But one point to bear in mind is that you don't want to be having MRIs very often, because quite often you're given a substance to allow scarring, that's, you know, areas of damage to the heart, to become apparent, and you don't want to be giving that agent more than perhaps every 3, 4, 5 years. So you want a baseline perhaps, and then depending on the echo and the MRI features, then you might decide whether and when it's necessary to repeat it. So again, in different areas of the country, as Marina was saying in relation to physiotherapy, access to MRIs, which is a more expensive test, a more difficult test, it's a much longer test than an echo, and it's more demanding to undertake for the patient having it. Then you decide if the result would change your management, in other words, help you decide whether now is the time to start treatment or not, then it's a test that would be useful, but not something you want to have sort of year on year. The echo would suffice once you have a baseline assessment. So it's a bit nuanced rather than a black and white answer is what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you, John. That's really helpful. And then so we had an advanced question about carriers and manifesting carriers, and we've got one in the chat now as well. So how important is it that carriers and manifesting carriers have regular heart checkups?
Again, the natural history of heart involvement in women who carry the DMD gene is not well worked out. And it's for that reason that although the vast majority of women who carry the DMD gene won't develop problems, we're advising regular heart checks in women who know they carry the DMD gene, that's DMD or BMD gene, because again, it will remain asymptomatic if the heart is becoming involved until it's very advanced. And the fact that you're not manifesting skeletal muscle problems doesn't mean you're not manifesting or going to manifest heart muscle elements of effect. So the typical involvement in a woman who's going to develop cardiomyopathy or is developing cardiomyopathy is for the heart to be the only area that's involved. So the fact you've no muscle problems doesn't mean your heart isn't becoming affected. And symptoms, again, as we said for BMD or anyone else, symptoms are not relevant in deciding whether the heart is becoming affected or not. So we'd recommend testing, a schedule of testing, and the interval between tests dictated by what the original test shows. Again, with an increased emphasis on MRI rather than echo. So the testing can be, if you like, light touch and less frequent than you might do with an echo. And perhaps one final important point to make is that in carriers, just because your first heart assessment is normal in every respect, that doesn't mean that you should curtail surveillance. You can go on and manifest heart weakness later, even though at some previous date you've had a normal assessment. So don't lapse from follow-up. Follow what advice you're given based on the initial testing.
Okay, thank you, John. I have got another cardiac question. I'm not going to answer it in this section. So if you have sent it in, we will answer it because it just feels too specific for this. So we can answer it after the seminar potentially. So there are a couple of other questions in the Q&A. Somebody wants to connect with you, Marina, so I will deal with that separately because it sounds like they live in London and they essentially probably need a physiotherapist in London. So if we'll get some more information on that one and get back to that person who's asked that question, I think that would be probably the best way to deal with it. So I have a general question. So someone's asked, my son is 4, he's symptomatic with a diagnosis of dystrophinopathy. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. When should we expect to get a diagnosis of either Becker's or Duchenne? So a very open-ended, difficult question to answer, but any insights into that one?
I think that's a very difficult question. I think the doctors looking after your son will look at the genetic report, but they'll also look at whether or not your son is showing signs of symptoms, because I think at such a young age it can be very, very difficult. And particularly, obviously we haven't got the whole picture, but if there's any cognitive involvement where there's a bit of developmental delay, that can have an impact. So I think sometimes time actually answers this question better than anything else. So I think I'd be guided by the clinical team and how they manage it. It was a very difficult to be in this situation with such a young child, I think.
Thank you, Ross. I just wanted to raise the question so they'd be aware that that's what they need to do. But thank you for that, Ross. Really helpful. We've got quite a few questions from someone who has an 8-year-old diagnosed with Becker muscular dystrophy. Because I've got one eye on the time here, I will come to those questions. We'll probably answer them after the seminar, so we aren't ignoring them. We will get to them, but there's quite a few with different questions, so we'll come to that. But we've just had another question in. So someone's father's 66 and has symptoms that seem to have got a lot worse recently for his legs and arms. So he hasn't been assessed for many years, and they need to ring the GP for a referral. But who do I ask him to be referred to? So from a helpline perspective, I would suggest a neuromuscular team, and the GP can do that. But is there any further advice we can give? It sounds like they need a physiotherapy assessment, and if they've not been seen, then they need the cardiac and all the other checks as well. So that's what I would suggest. Is there anything else to add to that? No. Okay, thank you. What I would suggest for Jazz, who's asked this question, is do call our helpline and we can actually double check who your closest neuromuscular centre is to get a referral to. So that would be really helpful. Right, so one question that we had about splints very quickly. So can somebody just, it's a very open question, can somebody advise on leg splints?
So that is a very open question.
It is, yeah.
So with leg splints, it depends what you're looking at, what you're trying to achieve, because we tend to use splints for two reasons. One is if there's a very unstable joint to help promote that, more stability. And the other one is to induce a stretch on a tight muscle, which is what we tend to use more in neuromuscular conditions. So if it's looking at perhaps ankles that are becoming tighter, then an ankle splint would hold the joint in a nice position, a stretched position for a long period of time, and that would be a really good static stretch. And when we're looking at tight joints, we don't just look at one specific type of stretch, we look at a variety. So we look at static stretching, passive stretching, active stretching. So we look at a variety of different ways to stretch that joint. And splints are often part of that suite of different techniques that we would utilize to get the best possible outcome, because we know that a good static splint and a stretching practice gives us much better outcomes than if you just stretch or if you just do the splint on its own, if it's the ankle that we're talking about. So I would definitely say it depends. And again, the orthotics department, but alongside your neuromuscular physio as well, because often it's a balance. You don't just want to you know, give a splint. You want to make sure that everything else is going alongside that. So it's part of a treatment plan that needs to be done in association with the team. And so the type of splint would depend on what you're trying to achieve at the end of the day, really.
Okay, thank you, Marina. Dave, do you have something to add?
Well, just basically, I've wore splints in one way or another since I was diagnosed, and although when I was younger it was a bit of a pain sometimes wearing them, it's probably been of benefit to me, and I would recommend it. Although on a hot day, I particularly didn't like wearing them, but they've no doubt helped. So
Okay,
hopefully
thank
they
you
do for everyone else who needs them.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's always good to get first-hand experience about things like that. So really helpful. Thank you. I'm just going to hand over to Kate as she has a question for Ross. And then I will come back with 2 advanced questions that we've had. And then we will try and wrap things up because I'm watching the time as we speak. Kate.
Thanks, Nero, and thanks for keeping an eye on the time. We could be here all afternoon, I'm sure, because it's fascinating having this conversation. So, Nero, there's sorry, Ros, there's a question in the chat about a young man who's 8 years old, and he's been diagnosed with what's been described here as a mild form of Becker muscular dystrophy. I mean, he's still active, he has no symptoms. I think the person is wondering whether the potential treatment that you've been talking about, the EDG 5506, could be effective for this age group, and treating it earlier being sort of sometimes seen as a good thing. Is this something that is in the pipeline?
Well, as I said, we don't know yet if this drug is going to be clinically effective. It's only been trialed on the 12 patients and in their phase 1 study. So there's good evidence from the biomarkers that they reduce, but we can't really say very much on the basis of an open label trial of 12 people. So we need the results of the Grand Canyon study. And also, as I've said, there is a trial ongoing as well for adolescents with Becker dystrophy. So we need to wait for the results of those trials really to understand what the effectiveness of this product is going to be. What we know so far is that it's tolerated well, and it seems to be safe to take. I think that's about as much as we can say at the moment. And I know it's always frustrating because trials seem to take such a long time, but as I said, they're really important, because what we don't want is to end up giving people a treatment if it's not going to be beneficial. So we've really got to balance that benefit. So what I'd say to you is keep an eye out, look at the various websites. Clinicaltrials.gov is a really good website if anyone wants to have a look and see what's going on in Becker dystrophy. And also that's where the results of trials are posted. There's a legal obligation for trial results to be posted there. So keep an eye out, but it's, this is a really exciting time in the field of neuromuscular diseases, and particularly muscular dystrophies and SMAs as well. In my lifetime as a physician working with people with muscular dystrophy since 1990, the amount of progress is far greater than I would have ever imagined. It's extraordinary, the progress that's being made. So yes, it's still going to take a bit longer to get the results, but it's a very, very exciting time. And so I just look out for those results on the various websites as they come through.
Thank you. Thanks. Back to you, Nero.
Thank you both. So last question from the Q&A, and then just 2 questions in the last 10 minutes from some advanced questions. So there's a question about duplications. So my son was diagnosed with Becker in 2009. He has some muscle weakness and battles a lot with fatigue. How common are duplications, and does the mutation determine the level of weakness? So just open to anyone who has any comments on that one.
So duplications, it depends where the duplication is in the gene. Obviously, you know, there are hotspots in the gene. Deletions are by far the most common variants that we see in the DMD gene, followed by some duplications and some mutations. So duplication in exon 2, for example, is the most common area for a duplication in Duchenne. But duplications are much less common than deletions. And whether or not there's it has an impact on the degree of muscle weakness, you know, that I think it's difficult to say without knowing where that duplication is. Usually when there's phenotype genotype correlation, it's quite specific. So for example, sometimes, you know, exon 45 can be a bit milder. You know, there are various some deletions correlate a little bit greater in terms of heart involvement, and some others in terms of brain involvement. But overall, in terms of muscle strength, there's probably not a massive effect. You know, the condition is still follows the same kind of course, really. But there might also be other modifying genes that we don't test for. So it's quite a complex picture, I think, rather than just saying, well, you know, if you've got this duplication, it's going to mean this or that. It's not really possible to say that.
Thank you, Ross. So just a question on fatigue that we actually had in advance, one for you, Pam. So I feel like fatigue I experience is becoming worse as my condition progresses. It can also vary from day to day, and no 2 days are the same. Do you have any advice or suggestions on how to manage this? And I know you did touch on this in your introduction.
No, thank you for the question. I think there's lots of different things we could say, and you know, we talk about for hours actually, but I think when you're talking about no 2 days being the same, I think that's really key. And one of the most important things that people learn throughout the course of their lives really is how to listen to your body, and knowing your body and knowing basically when to stop. Often what happens is you have this boom and bust pattern where you maybe have a day where you feel things are quite good. And so because it's a good day, I need to maximize that. And so I'm going to make sure I get all the things done that I couldn't do the other day because I had a bad day. And so you end up being really physically active, or even mentally active as well. So mental fatigue is also a problem. So you end up doing so many things that by the end of the day, your body is just totally finished. You crash and burn, and then you have this dip, and then you're likely to have the next day, or sometimes it's a few days, where you sort of have the bust. So the boom is doing all the things, and the bust is sort of flat out, not really being able to manage. And the way of trying to sort of prevent that from happening is to try and do little and often. So what I was saying at the beginning as well is pacing yourself. So rather than on a good day thinking, right, I need to do everything now, try and hold back a little bit and try and just prioritize some of those things, but make sure you intersperse everything that you do with a good rest. And this is a really hard thing to do because naturally we want to just get everything done. And it's something that will take time to get right as well. And there will also be times when it's not possible to do that. So I had someone the other day who had to go to a friend's wedding, and that was a day that they just knew they had to then take off the next few days afterwards because it was just going to be really taxing. And so, you know, life does sometimes have realities where we can't pace ourselves, but knowing your body can allow you to prepare for that. So that would be the main thing. And the other thing with pacing really is to learn to rest before you feel like you need to. So resting kind of needs to come in just before you feel overtired, because once you're overtired, that's really an indication that you've done too much. And particularly with Becker's, often when you feel cramps and pains, that's the indication that actually you've pushed it too far already. So stopping at that point is almost a little bit too late. So having to learn how much you can do before that begins would be a key point there. And yeah, I would encourage you to go onto MD UK website and look. There's a fatigue section, and you can download the booklet. And we talk quite a lot about pacing there and some ideas and strategies to thresh out a little bit more.
Thanks, Pam. Really, really helpful. So final question before I end the summit. So someone said my mobility has changed a lot in recent years, particularly after lockdown, and it's become more challenging to get out and about socially. Sometimes I feel a bit isolated because of this. Can you advise anything about this? Any tips or suggestions? And open to Dave and everyone else.
I've prepared an answer, although I wrote it, so I hope I don't sound too robotic when I read it. But
Absolutely fine. You'll
now.
get all your key points in.
Right. Well, first of all, we don't know this person's circumstances, but I'm fortunate. I've got like my wife, my son, my family, my in-laws, and do a lot with them. They keep me involved in that. But also with working full time, I also have a lot of friends and colleagues through this who were very supportive through everything. Like my job, I'm required to be in the office 2 days a week since the pandemic. And I always try and make the effort when fatigue isn't affecting me to go in the office and see colleagues and that. I also have numerous hobbies, probably the main of which is going to my hometown football teams, Team Carlisle United. I go to those matches, which is a social occasion. I get to see a lot of friends, and some of my relatives go with me as well. I help with the supporters group at the football club. I run the Scottish-based supporters Facebook page as well. Also go to things like concerts and a lot of the things you would with your son and stuff like that. As and when, obviously, I feel fit enough to do that. But does my declining mobility affect me? In many respects, it does. I can no longer physically get into some of my in-laws, like my sister-in-law and all that. I can't get in their house because there's a lot of stairs and things like that, or the toilets are up a lot of stairs. I don't travel to away matches for the football anymore because I used to go home and away all over England to watch them. Because the physical toll it was taking on my body was too much. So I also try and plan where I'm going, how long it'll be, what I would be doing. Much like what Pamela was saying, I try and manage what I can and can't do. Although I wouldn't certainly recommend going on big shopping trips with your spouse, because once I did that, I was out of action for 2 days. Took me ages to recover. I mentioned about using a manual wheelchair for longer walks because I was isolating myself a bit before that. I think I mentioned it previously, but I was like, I'd sit on a bench and just wait for my son and my wife or whatever, or wait in the car. And you're not part of things. You're isolating yourself a little bit. So I found since using the chair and having that option, that's opened things up a bit more for me, which was a bit of a surprise to me because I don't know, you kind of think of it as a psychological barrier, but in a lot of ways it's helped. So what else have I put? Well, try and get yourself out there, get a hobby that involves social interaction, go to social events where possible. I think it's important to admit that you need help as well. And this person's obviously reached out, so I think that's a good sign to show they're wanting to resolve the issue. And I think contacting Muscular Dystrophy UK is a good place to start as well. They will know organisations that can help you or get you involved with social services if you need help and support going out and about. But then again, these are just my suggestions. Not everyone's situation are the same. We're all affected by it differently. But as I say, I think sharing it's a good start. There.
Thank you, Dave. That is really, really helpful, and just sharing your personal experience, I think, really helps people that will be in similar situations to you, whether they've got Becker muscular dystrophy or another condition. So really, really helpful, and thank you for being so honest with us as well at this seminar. We also at MD UK have peer support volunteers. So if you are struggling and you want to talk to somebody who's got the same condition, a similar condition, who's been where Dave has, and other people that are living with conditions, do contact our helpline or info inbox, and we can put you in touch with somebody who has shared experience and may be able to support you from a peer perspective. So unfortunately, that's the end of today's session, and I'd like to thank all our panelists and the people who've helped to guide the discussions with such good questions and interactions and comments. You'll see the recordings of all other sessions on our website, and the recording of this session will be posted there later this week or early next week. We'll also be in touch with a short survey to gather some feedback on the session, which for us is invaluable as it helps to shape what we do in the future. And then just a reminder, which I've been asked to do, MD UK Muscle Matters seminars are a source of information, but do not replace direct advice from a specialist consultant or a health professional. If you have any concerns, you're advised to speak to your neuromuscular clinical team or health professional directly. And I think that has been reiterated throughout this seminar. So thank you all for joining us today on this wet, rainy, grey afternoon, and hopefully it's been really helpful and you can go away with some useful information. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you, Dave.
Thanks.
Lovely to see you, Dave.
Yeah, see you soon, maybe.